The massive lecture hall of the Galactic Institute buzzed with nervous energy as students from across the galaxy settled into their seats. The chamber itself was a marvel of engineering, its crystalline walls shifting colors to match the emotional state of its occupants. Today, those walls pulsed an anxious orange. Professor Velthak materialized at the front of the room in a shower of blue light, his towering crystalline form casting rainbow reflections across the curved ceiling. Standing nearly 3 meters tall, his translucent body contained swirling galaxies of geometric patterns that had mesmerized students for over 4 centuries. His 6 crystalline appendages moved with fluid grace as he adjusted the holographic displays surrounding him. "Ah, my precious collection of inferior minds." Velthak's voice resonated through bioneural implants directly into each student's consciousness. The sound carried the weight of eons, dripping with the kind of arrogance that only came from outliving entire civilizations. "Today marks another delightful opportunity to witness your inevitable failures." The students shifted uncomfortably in their adaptive seats. In the front rows, a cluster of Zephyrian students, their blue-scaled heads already glowing as they connected to the galactic data network, prepared their advanced computational matrices. Their gill slits fluttered nervously, releasing small puffs of bioluminescent particles that danced in the artificial atmosphere. Behind them, 3 silicon-based students from the Andorian collective sat motionless, their chrome bodies all ready, humming with internal processing units that could calculate faster than most organic brains could think. Electrical currents danced across their metallic surfaces like living tattoos. A pair of telepathic Valdorians, their large oval heads pulsing with psychic energy, had already begun sharing computational resources through their mental link. Their forearms moved in perfect synchronization as they prepared multiple data streams. In the middle section, a group of insectoid hive minds chittered anxiously, their compound eyes reflecting thousands of tiny holographic displays as they accessed their species' collective knowledge database. Each individual was connected to millions of others across space, giving them access to computational power that dwarfed most planetary supercomputers. And in the very back row, almost hidden behind the towering forms of their alien classmates, sat 2 humans. Jiho Kim adjusted his position in the adaptive chair that seemed confused by his simple biological makeup. Unlike his classmates, he carried no neural implants, no quantum processors, no connection to vast databases spanning the galaxy, just a worn leather notebook, a collection of old-fashioned pencils, and a mind shaped by a species that had learned to survive by thinking differently. His friend Minji Park sat beside him, equally low-tech, but carrying a small tablet that looked primitive compared to the reality-bending technology surrounding them. She nervously tucked a strand of black hair behind her ear, a gesture that seemed almost alien in this room full of beings who had evolved beyond such simple habits. "I still can't believe they let us into advanced quantum physics," Minji whispered, her voice barely audible in the vast chamber. "Half these students have been studying for longer than our entire species has existed." Jiho smiled and flipped open his notebook to a fresh page. "Sometimes being new has advantages." Professor Velthak's form brightened as he began his lecture, his crystalline body now pulsing with theatrical blue light. "Today, my cognitively challenged pupils, you will attempt what I call the dimensional bridge calculation." His voice carried across the chamber like the toll of an ancient bell. "This elegant problem has humbled the greatest minds in the galaxy for precisely 47 years, 3 months, and 16 days. The professor gestured with 4 of his appendages, causing the air above the students to shimmer and crack. Reality itself seemed to bend as a massive holographic display materialized, filled with equations so complex they appeared to writhe and move like living things. Quantum variables danced through 11 dimensions, their mathematical relationships forming patterns that hurt to look at directly. "Most students," Velthak continued, his tone now dripping with condescension, "require several hours to even comprehend the basic parameters. The record time for solution is 4 hours and 37 minutes, achieved by a collective mind using 17 linked processors." He paused dramatically. "I will be magnanimous today and allow you a full hour." The moment the words left his, Consciousness link, chaos erupted throughout the lecture hall. The Zephyrian students' heads blazed brilliant blue as they connected to quantum computers orbiting their homeworld. Their gill slits worked overtime, processing the increased neural load. The silicon-based Andorians' body's temperature spiked as their internal processors began working at maximum capacity, small cooling vents opening along their chrome limbs. The telepathic Valdorians joined minds completely, their psychic link crackling with visible energy as they shared processing power across light years of space. The insectoid hive minds began chattering in ultrasonic frequencies, their communication so rapid it sounded like static electricity. Advanced holographic displays materialized around each student group, showing computational matrices that boggled the mind. Probability cascades flowed like waterfalls of pure mathematics. Quantum processors hummed with power that could run small space stations. In this symphony of advanced technology and computational might, Jiho Kim reached into his backpack and pulled out a simple wooden pencil. The contrast was almost comical. While his classmates deployed technology that could calculate the movement of entire star systems, Jiho sharpened his pencil with a small handheld sharpener, the tiny metal shavings falling onto his desk like snow. "Jiho," Minji whispered urgently, watching a nearby Zephyrian student whose holographic display now showed equations flowing in 17 different languages. "Maybe we should ask to borrow some processing power." But Jiho was already studying the problem, his brown eyes moving across the impossible mathematics with quiet focus. While around him the greatest technological minds in the galaxy began their assault on the dimensional bridge calculation, he simply opened his primitive notebook and began to sketch. The lecture hall had transformed into a battlefield of minds and machines. All around Jiho, the galaxy's most advanced beings threw everything they had at the dimensional bridge calculation. The Zephyrian students in front of him were now connected to 3 different star system networks, their scaled heads glowing so brightly that other students had to dim their optical sensors. To his left, the silicon-based Andorians had begun. Operating in perfect synchronization, their chrome bodies linked through quantum entanglement. Data streams flowed between them like rivers of pure light, creating geometric patterns that danced across their metallic surfaces. The temperature in their section had risen so much that cooling drones had automatically deployed from the ceiling, hovering around them like mechanical angels. The insectoid hive minds were chittering in frequencies that made the air itself vibrate. Their compound eyes reflected thousands of tiny calculations, each one tackling a different aspect of the problem. They had summoned holographic displays that stretched up to the curved ceiling, creating a tower of mathematics that pulsed with bioluminescent algorithms. Even the usually calm, telepathic Valdorians were straining. Their psychic link had expanded to include distant relatives on 7 different worlds, creating a mental network that spanned half the galaxy. The effort was so intense that small sparks of psychic energy were actually visible around their large heads, crackling like miniature lightning storms. And in the middle of all this technological chaos, Jiho Kim sat quietly with his wooden pencil, staring at the impossible problem floating above them all. The equations were truly magnificent in their complexity. Quantum variables twisted through dimensions that had no names, mathematical relationships that described the very fabric of space and time. It was the kind of problem that supercomputers worked on for years, the kind of calculation that required the processing power of entire planets. Jiho tilted his head slightly, the way he used to do as a child when looking at clouds, trying to see shapes that others missed. Then very calmly he began to draw. His first mark was simple, just a circle in the center of his notebook page. Around it, he drew another circle, then another. Not the complex mathematical constructs his classmates were creating, but simple, hand-drawn shapes that a kindergarten student might recognize. Minji glanced over at his work and felt her stomach drop. While she was trying to understand the basics of the quantum equations on her tablet, her friend was apparently drawing bubbles. "Jiho," she whispered urgently, "this isn't art class. Shouldn't you be using the quantum calculator they gave us?" She gestured to the small device on their shared desk, a piece of technology worth more than most human cities, capable of calculations that would make Earth's greatest supercomputers look like pocket calculators. Every other student in the room was using similar devices, or better, but Jiho just shook his head gently and continued drawing. His pencil moved across the paper with confident strokes, connecting his circles with simple lines, adding small arrows that seemed to flow from one shape to another. From the front of the room, Professor Velthak's attention was drawn to the unusual stillness in the back corner. While every other section of his classroom buzzed with intense computational activity, the human section was quiet, suspiciously quiet. The professor's crystalline form shifted as he focused his ancient eyes on the two human students. What he saw made his geometric patterns pulse with amusement. One human was frantically tapping at a primitive tablet, clearly overwhelmed by the problem's complexity. But the other one, the male, was doing something that defied all logic. He was drawing pictures with a wooden stick on processed tree matter. "Class!" Professor Velthak announced, his voice cutting through the computational chaos like a sonic blade. The various alien students paused their work, cooling systems whirring as processing units temporarily reduced their load. "I believe we have discovered a new approach to quantum physics." His crystalline body glowed brighter with barely contained laughter. Observe the human child in the back row. While his superior classmates employ the galaxy's most advanced computational systems, he has chosen to use Stone Age tools. The professor's 6 appendages gestured dramatically toward Jiho, and suddenly every eye, optical sensor, and psychic perception in the room focused on the human student. Perhaps he believes that quantum mechanics can be solved through primitive art therapy. Laughter rippled through the classroom. The Zephyrian's gill slits fluttered with amusement, releasing small clouds of glowing particles. The silicon-based students' chrome bodies flickered with what passed for humor among their species. Even the usually serious hive minds chittered in frequencies that translated to mockery. Minji felt heat rise to her cheeks. She wanted to sink into her chair, to disappear, to be anywhere but in this room where her species was being humiliated, in front of the galaxy's greatest minds. "Jiho," she hissed under her breath, "everyone's staring. Maybe we should just give up." But Jiho seemed completely unbothered by the attention. If anything, the mockery appeared to help him focus. His hand continued moving across the paper with steady confidence, adding details to his simple diagrams that somehow made them seem less childish and more purposeful. He drew what looked like flowing water, simple curved lines that moved from one circle to another. Then he added small symbols that resembled molecular structures, but simplified in a way that made them almost beautiful. His patterns began to fill the page, not with the rigid mathematical precision of his classmates' holographic displays, but with something that looked almost organic. The telepathic Valdorians tried to probe his thoughts, curious about what the human mind was actually processing, but what they found confused them even more. Instead of mathematical calculations, they sensed something that felt like music, like watching a river flow, like seeing the pattern in falling leaves. "Fascinating," one of them whispered to their partner. "The human's brain is processing the quantum equations as if they were natural phenomena rather than mathematical constructs." Professor Velthak overheard this psychic whisper, and his amusement grew even brighter. Natural phenomena? How delightfully primitive. Perhaps next he'll consult tea leaves or animal entrails for quantum calculations. More laughter filled the room, but Jiho remained focused on his work. His simple sketches were beginning to connect in ways that created larger patterns. What had started as individual circles and lines was becoming something that looked almost like a map, not of space, but of relationships, of flows, of connections that existed beyond the purely mathematical. Around him, his classmates returned to their advanced calculations, dismissing the human's approach as the desperate scribbling of an overwhelmed primitive mind. Cooling systems hummed back to life, holographic displays blazed with renewed intensity, and the symphony of advanced computation resumed. But in his quiet corner, with nothing but a wooden pencil and his uniquely human way of seeing patterns, Jiho Kim continued to work on something that would soon change everything they thought they knew about solving impossible problems. The chronometer on the wall showed exactly 10 minutes had passed when something unexpected happened. In a room filled with the galaxy's most advanced computational systems working at maximum capacity, the quietest corner suddenly went completely still. Jiho Kim closed his simple notebook with a soft snap that somehow cut through all the electronic. Humming, quantum processing, and psychic energy crackling through the air. The sound was so ordinary, so primitive, that it seemed almost alien in this temple of advanced technology. He stood up calmly, brushing a few pencil shavings from his desk, and looked directly at Professor Velthak. "I'm finished," he announced in a clear, steady voice. The effect was instantaneous and dramatic. The Zephyrian students' glowing heads flickered as their concentration broke. One of them was so startled that his connection to the galactic network temporarily severed, causing his holographic display to collapse in a shower of sparkling data fragments. The silicon-based Andorians' chrome bodies actually made a collective grinding sound as their synchronized processing units stuttered. Cooling drones hovering around them wobbled in confusion, their sensors unable to process what they had just witnessed. The insectoid hive minds chittering reached such a high frequency that several students had to adjust their audio dampeners. Their compound eyes reflected thousands of error messages as their collective consciousness tried to compute the impossibility of what the human had just claimed. Even the telepathic Valdorian's psychic link flickered with disbelief. Their mental network, spanning 7 worlds and including some of the galaxy's greatest minds, was suddenly filled with a single thought. That's impossible. The lecture hall erupted into chaos. Several students laughed outright, not the polite, academic chuckling from before, but genuine belly laughs that echoed off the crystalline walls. A group of young Zephyrians in the front row were laughing so hard that their gill slits were releasing small puffs of bioluminescent particles, creating tiny fireworks of amusement. Other students looked confused, their various optical sensors and psychic receptors trying to determine if this was some kind of human joke they didn't understand. The insectoid hive minds began rapid-fire chittering among themselves, trying to access their species' database for information about human humor patterns. In the middle of it all, Professor Velthak's crystalline form shifted from condescending blue to an amused yellow that pulsed with each wave of laughter from his students. His geometric patterns swirled faster, creating hypnotic spirals that reflected his entertainment. "Impossible," the professor announced, his voice carrying across the room with the authority of centuries. The laughter began to die down as students focused on their ancient instructor. "Young human, in 10 minutes, you have either given up entirely or produced something so laughably incorrect that it will serve as a perfect example of what not to do." The professor's 6 appendages gestured dramatically, causing new holographic displays to materialize around him. Perhaps you believe that quantum dimensional physics can be solved through finger painting. Or maybe you've discovered that the secrets of the universe are hidden in children's drawings. More laughter rippled through the classroom, but this time it had an edge to it. The students weren't just amused anymore, they were beginning to feel embarrassed for the human. Minji Park had actually covered her face with her hands, wishing she could disappear into her adaptive chair. "Please, human child," Professor Velthak continued, his yellow glow now pulsing with theatrical anticipation. "Do share your solution with the class. We are all eager to learn what wisdom your Stone Age methods have revealed." The massive holographic display behind him showed the dimensional bridge calculation in all its terrible complexity. Quantum variables twisted through 11 dimensions, mathematical relationships that described forces beyond imagination. Around the room, the galaxy's greatest minds continued their desperate assault on the problem, their advanced systems working so hard that the room's temperature had risen noticeably. Jiho looked around the room calmly, taking in the mixture of amusement, confusion, and anticipation on the faces of his classmates. Then, with quiet confidence that seemed almost alien in this environment of frantic computation, he walked to the front of the room. His simple leather notebook looked absurdly primitive as he carried it past holographic displays that could simulate entire universes. His wooden pencil seemed like a relic from prehistory, compared to the quantum processors humming around him. But something about his calm confidence began to affect the room's atmosphere. The laughter gradually died down as students noticed that the human didn't look embarrassed or defeated. If anything, he seemed more focused than anyone else in the room. Professor Velthak's yellow glow flickered with curiosity despite himself. In all his centuries of teaching, he had never seen a student approach an impossible problem with such quiet certainty. Jiho reached the front of the classroom and turned to face his audience. Behind him, the massive holographic display continued to show the dimensional bridge calculation in all its mathematical horror. Quantum equations twisted and writhed like living things, their complexity enough to drive ordinary minds to madness. He opened his simple notebook to a page covered with hand-drawn circles, lines, and flowing patterns that looked like something a child might create with crayons. "Think of it like water flowing through connected pipes," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the now quiet room. The contrast was stunning. Behind him, mathematics that could describe the birth and death of stars. In his hands, drawings. That wouldn't look out of place in an elementary school art class. But as he began to explain, something strange started to happen. His simple analogies and childish visual representations began to make the impossible problem seem less impossible. "These quantum variables," he said, pointing to a section of the holographic display that had been confusing the greatest minds in the galaxy, "they're not barriers to break through. They're just different paths for the same flow." He held up his notebook, showing a simple diagram of circles connected by curved lines. "See? The dimensional bridges aren't separate constructs. They're all part of one continuous system." Around the room, several students stopped their frantic calculations. The telepathic Valdorians exchanged confused psychic whispers. Even some of the silicon-based Andorians reduced their processing load slightly, their chrome bodies dimming as they diverted attention to the human's explanation. Because somehow, impossibly, his childish drawings were beginning to make sense of the mathematical chaos that had stumped them all. As Jiho continued his explanation, something extraordinary began to happen in the lecture hall. The amused yellow glow that had been pulsing through Professor Velthak's crystalline form started to flicker, like a candle in the wind. His ancient geometric patterns, which had swirled with condescending entertainment just moments before, began to slow and then stop entirely. "Look at this section here," Jiho said, pointing to a particularly complex part of the holographic display, where quantum variables twisted through what appeared to be impossible mathematical knots. "Everyone's trying to untangle this by calculating each individual thread. But what if you don't need to untangle it at all?" He held up his notebook, showing a simple drawing that looked like a river flowing around a rock. "The dimensional barriers aren't walls to break through," he explained, his voice gaining confidence as he saw some students actually listening now. "They're membranes to flow around. You don't need to calculate infinite variables when you recognize the pattern." The first to react was one of the telepathic Valdorians. Her large oval head suddenly flared with bright psychic energy as the implications of Jiho's words hit her expanded consciousness. She immediately shared the insight with her mental network, and within seconds, telepathic minds across 7-star systems were buzzing with excitement. "By the ancient codes," she whispered, her forearms trembling slightly. "He's right. We've been approaching this like a demolition problem when it's actually a navigation problem." Professor Velthak's crystalline form began cycling through colors rapidly, yellow to orange to red to a confused purple that none of his students had ever seen before. His 6 appendages moved frantically as he began running verification calculations, his centuries of accumulated knowledge suddenly feeling inadequate. The silicon-based Andorians were the next to understand. Their chrome bodies, which had been humming with maximum processing power, suddenly went quiet. One by one, their internal systems began shifting from brute force calculation to pattern recognition, following the pathway that Jiho's simple drawings had revealed. "Efficiency increase of 847%, one of them announced in their characteristic monotone voice. "Human approach eliminates 94.7% of unnecessary computational steps." Around the room, Other students began abandoning their complex holographic displays to focus on Jiho's explanation. The insectoid hive minds chittering dropped to confused whispers as their collective consciousness struggled to process how something so simple could be so effective. Jiho turned to another section of the massive holographic display where equations describing dimensional stability made the air itself seem to bend and warp. And here, where everyone's calculating force vectors and energy requirements, you're thinking about it like building a bridge across a canyon. But dimensional space doesn't work like normal space. He flipped to another page in his notebook, showing what looked like a child's drawing of soap bubbles connected by thin films. It's more like soap bubbles touching each other. The connection already exists. You just need to recognize it and step through. Professor Velthak's verification systems were working so hard now that small sparks of energy were actually crackling around his crystalline form. His ancient databases containing the mathematical wisdom of thousands of civilizations were being cross-referenced at speeds that made the room's temperature spike even higher. But with each check, each verification, each desperate attempt to find a flaw in the human's work, the professor's amazement grew. The solution wasn't just correct, it was elegant in a way that centuries of mathematical tradition had somehow missed entirely. Minji Park sat in stunned silence, watching her human friend casually revolutionize quantum physics with drawings that looked like they belonged on a refrigerator. She had known Jiho since they were children, had seen him solve puzzles in ways that confused their teachers, but this was beyond anything she had imagined possible. "How did you see this?" she whispered, her voice barely audible in the now hushed lecture hall. Jiho smiled, the same gentle expression he'd worn when they were kids, and he'd explain why a complicated math problem was actually simple once you looked at it the right way. "Humans think differently," he said. "We see patterns instead of just processing data. Sometimes the biggest problems have the simplest solutions if you stop making them complicated." The Zephyrian students, their heads still glowing with connection to galactic networks, began receiving confirmations from some of the most advanced computational systems in known space. Star system-wide processors that had been working on variations of the dimensional bridge calculation for decades were suddenly able to solve problems that had seemed impossible just minutes before. One young Zephyrian turned to his study partner, his gill slits fluttering with excitement. "The quantum research stations at Centauri Prime just confirmed it. They're reporting breakthrough results using the human's approach. Problems they've been working on for years are suddenly trivial." Professor Velthak's form had now shifted to a color that had no name, a swirling mixture of shock, wonder, and something that might have been fear. For the first time in centuries, his absolute confidence in traditional methods was cracking. "Impossible," he muttered, but his voice lacked conviction now. His verification systems had run thousands of checks, approached the problem from every conceivable angle, consulted databases spanning galactic civilizations. Every single analysis came back with the same result. The human was correct. Not just correct, but brilliantly, elegantly, impossibly correct. "This..." Professor Velthak's voice cracked like breaking crystal. "This is correct." The words seemed to physically pain him to speak. Not just correct, revolutionary. The lecture hall fell into absolute silence. The only sounds were the gentle hum of cooling systems and the distant throb of the space station's engines. Even the hive minds had stopped their chittering entirely. Then, slowly, something unprecedented began to happen. The telepathic Valdorians were the first, their large heads bowing slightly in a gesture of respect that their species reserved for true intellectual breakthroughs. The silicon-based Andorians followed, their chrome bodies dimming their displays in acknowledgement of superior logic. Even the proud Zephyrians, connected to the greatest minds in their stellar empire, began to understand that they had just witnessed something that would change how the galaxy approached impossible problems. In the back of the room, using nothing but a wooden pencil and a leather notebook, a human had just redefined what it meant to think. The news traveled faster than light, itself through the quantum communication networks that connected the Galactic Institute to every corner of known space. Within the first hour, emergency sessions were being called on a dozen different worlds. By the second hour, The Institute's ancient corridors were filled with the sound of approaching spacecraft as senior faculty members abandoned their research projects and raced back to witness what was being called the greatest breakthrough in quantum physics since the discovery of dimensional folding. The Institute's docking bays, normally quiet except for the occasional supply ship, suddenly buzzed. With activity that hadn't been seen in decades, sleek Zephyrian research vessels materialized from hyperspace in flashes of blue light, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with the same bioluminescence as their creators. Massive Andorian transport cubes arrived with mechanical precision, their chrome surfaces reflecting the station's lights like mirrors. Even the mysterious Valdorian mine ships came, their crystalline forms barely visible as they phased partially out of normal space. Dr. Kethvar, the Institute's ancient chancellor, had been in deep meditation on his homeworld when the quantum pulse message reached him. The elderly Christic had founded the Institute over 800 years ago and had never in all that time interrupted his century-long meditation cycles for anything less than galactic emergencies. He arrived in a ship that was more crystalline, growth than spacecraft, its living walls pulsing with the accumulated wisdom of millennia. As he stepped into the Institute's main corridor, his massive form casting rainbow shadows, every student and faculty member within sight automatically bowed in respect. "Where is this human?" His voice resonated through the bio-neural network, carrying the weight of eons. Meanwhile, in Professor Velthak's private laboratory, a heated debate was raging. The room was packed with some of the galaxy's most brilliant minds, their various forms of advanced technology creating a light show that was visible from space. Holographic displays showed Jiho's simple solution from every conceivable angle, while quantum computers ran verification after verification. Dr. Zinthara, a legendary Zephyrian mathematician whose work had revolutionized faster-than-light travel, was staring at Jiho's hand-drawn diagrams with an expression of complete bewilderment. Her scaled head glowed so brightly with neural activity that other faculty members had to adjust their optical sensors. "It's impossible," she kept muttering, her gill slits fluttering rapidly. 47 years. 47 years I've been working on variations of this problem, and a human child solves it with drawings. Professor Quartek, whose silicon-based brain could process information faster than most star system computers, was running continuous analysis on the solution. His chrome body flickered with data streams as he spoke in his characteristic monotone. "Human approach shows 847% increase in efficiency. Computational requirements reduced by 94.7%. Logic pathway previously unknown to galactic databases. But how?" Dr. Zinthara demanded. "How does a species that only discovered fire 20,000 years ago see something we missed?" The laboratory's doors suddenly parted with a sound like singing crystal, and Professor Velthak entered. His form, which had been cycling through confused colors all afternoon, now showed a steady, deep blue that his colleagues recognized as profound contemplation. "I have spoken with the human," he announced, his voice carrying clearly through the crowded laboratory. The heated discussions immediately stopped as every being in the room focused on him. "And?" Dr. Zinthara prompted, impatiently. Velthak's crystalline form pulsed once, slowly. "He says we were all thinking like computers, processing infinite data points instead of recognizing patterns. He claims humans think in what he calls intuitive leaps." Professor Quartek's chrome body actually stuttered as his processors tried to compute this concept. Intuitive leaps? Define parameters. How does one leap without calculating trajectory? "That," Velthak said quietly, "is precisely what we don't understand." At that moment, the laboratory's emergency communication system activated, projecting a massive hologram of Chancellor Kethvar's ancient face. "All senior faculty report to the Grand Assembly Hall immediately. We have a situation that requires unprecedented action." The Grand Assembly Hall hadn't been used for its original purpose in over 3 centuries. The vast chamber, designed to hold representatives from every known species in the galaxy, stretched up into darkness that seemed to swallow light itself. Ancient crystal formations grew from the walls, each one containing the preserved wisdom of civilizations that had risen and fallen while the institute stood watching. As the faculty gathered, the hall's bioluminescent walls began to glow, responding to the collective mental energy of the assembled minds. Beings who had devoted their lives to understanding the universe filled the space with a symphony of different technologies. Humming quantum processors, crackling psychic energy, and the soft pulse of crystalline consciousness. Chancellor HFY stood at the center of it all, his massive form dwarfing even the largest faculty members. When he spoke, his voice didn't use the bio-neural network. It resonated directly through the crystal formations in the walls, making the entire hall ring like a cosmic bell. 800 years ago, I founded this institute with a simple belief, he began. That knowledge belongs to all beings, regardless of their origin or the methods they use to obtain it. Today, that belief has been tested in a way I never anticipated. The Chancellor's form shifted, becoming more translucent as he accessed deeper layers of consciousness. A human student has solved a problem that has challenged our greatest minds for decades. He did it not through superior technology or enhanced intelligence, but through what he calls pattern recognition and intuitive thinking. Murmurs filled the vast hall. Some faculty members were intrigued, others skeptical, and a few clearly disturbed by the implications. The question before us, HFY continued, is not whether the human solution is correct. Our verification systems have confirmed that beyond any doubt. The question is whether we are prepared to accept that our traditional methods, refined over millions of years, might have fundamental limitations. Dr. Zinthara rose from her seat, her bioluminescent head pulsing with agitation. Chancellor, with respect, we cannot simply abandon proven methodologies based on one fortunate guess by a primitive species. A fortunate guess? The voice came from the back of the hall, causing every head to turn. Professor Velthak was standing, his crystalline form now pulsing with something that might have been shame. I thought the same thing, until I spoke with the human after class. The hall fell silent as Velthak walked to the center, his footsteps ringing like chimes against the crystal floor. I asked him how he saw what we missed. His answer was both simple and profound. Velthak's form brightened as he shared the memory. He said that while we were processing infinite data points, humans look for patterns. They make intuitive leaps that bypass unnecessary complexity. They see the forest instead of calculating every leaf. Chancellor HFY's ancient features shifted into what might have been a smile. And what was your response to this revelation, Professor? For the first time in centuries, Velthak's voice carried uncertainty. I asked him to co-teach my advanced courses. The hall erupted. Faculty members who had worked together for millennia suddenly found themselves on opposite sides of a debate that threatened to reshape everything they thought they knew about intelligence, problem-solving, and the nature of knowledge itself. But, through it all, in a small dormitory room on the other side of the station, Jiho Kim sat quietly at his desk, working on homework assignments with the same wooden pencil and leather notebook that had just revolutionized galactic science. Minji knocked on his door, still stunned by the day's events. Jiho, there are news drones from every major world trying to interview you. The Chancellor wants to meet with you tomorrow. They're talking about creating a whole new department based on human thinking methods. Jiho looked up from his notebook, where he was sketching out solutions to next week's assignments. That sounds interesting, he said with the same quiet smile he'd worn when solving the impossible problem. But I should probably finish my homework first. As Minji watched her friend return to his simple drawings, she realized something that would echo through the halls of the Institute for generations to come. Sometimes, the most revolutionary breakthroughs didn't come from having the most advanced technology or the most powerful computers. Sometimes they came from thinking like a human. The end.